started. Thanks everybody for joining us. This topic is super important, at any stage of a business that if you have some like tried and true products and you just want to do like a test to see if you're actually making money on them, if you're being profitable, if there are some things you should be considering, this is great material. If you're just starting out and you're trying to put together a menu that's going to work with the pricing that you want to have for your customers, also a great chance to learn a lot during this hour and a half. So I am Laura Fox O'Sullivan. I'm the president of the Commissary. I take it that most of you know about the Commissary. If you don't, or if you're unfamiliar, the Commissary is the only food business incubator in upstate New York. It's also the only legal shared kitchen facility in Monroe County. What we do is that we provide very flexible, very affordable kitchen space for rent on an hourly basis for startup food businesses. Yeah, I just had somebody yesterday say, but isn't the Commissary really expensive? No, it's not. And it's definitely not expensive when you compare it to the cost of building out your own restaurant. It's $22 an hour to rent the kitchen space. We have beautiful brand new commercial kitchen equipment, so really large scale stuff to really help you bring your business to the next level. If maybe you're cooking at home right now, it's going to be a game changer for you. We also have a performance kitchen that allows you to interact with the public through cooking classes, demos, doing a pop-up so you can serve members of the public. We also have a pickup window, so if you're interested in doing a to-go style restaurant, it's a great fit for that. And so our website's a great resource. Hopefully you've checked it out if that's how you found out about our workshops. We have a lot of resources. We're always adding to it. We have a 360 tour, so you can check out what the space looks like even at this early stage. We have an info session every week, 4 to 5 on Zoom, and that's a great way to get some basic questions answered. We also have information about how to become a legal food business, and we're here to help. We also have some really exciting opportunities for our members coming up. We're going to have a stall at the public market that's going to be available on a rotating business basis for our member businesses to utilize. We aren't going to charge them for that. It is a benefit of membership. We also have a lottery every month that for qualified members, they'll receive a reduced rate hourly rent for the space. We're also doing a lot with social media and visibility for our members, and also creating events that highlight our members and get them access to new customers. So hopefully there's some benefit to these workshops and maybe the Commissary at some point in your business growth. So enough about us. So today we have 2 of our board members presenting topics that they know way more about than I do. So we're so grateful to have Chef Jim from REOC. I think we have quite a few of his students or former students on the call, which we love to see, and Rebecca Griffin from MCC. I will have them introduce themselves when they give their presentations as well. But the way that this is going to roll is that Chef Jim's going to provide an overview of food costing and the importance for business success. And then Rebecca's going to take over, and she's going to talk about the cost of your recipes. And there are going to be a lot of resources that are going to be thrown your way. They're yours to keep. They're super valuable. I know I'm the type of person that I think I get it while I'm listening, and I don't get it. I need to like think about it afterwards. So if you want to look at the worksheets while we're going through it, I would really recommend that you take a look at them afterwards too, if it kind of seemed a little complicated. We also have a lot of time set aside for Q&A. This is the whole point of this, is to answer your questions. If you have real products that you want us to kind of go through this process, let's do it. And we can do that during the Q&A. But I put some things in the chat already that if you want to, if either Chef Jim or Rebecca are going through their presentations and something's just not clicking, ask the question in the chat, and I'll try to ask them that question during their presentation. But if you have a question that's more general or about your product, you can either unmute yourself during that Q&A around 12:45, or you can just throw it in the chat at any time. Hannah is our IT whiz, and she's going to be throwing some stuff in the chat too. But if you click on the upcoming workshops tab that I put in the chat, you're going to be able to see that there are all of these links to different resources. So if you want to go ahead and download those now, you can, or Hannah's just going to be putting them in kind of in real time as they're discussed. So up to you, but know that you can find them 2 different ways. Okay, so with that, I want to hand it off to Chef Jim.
All right, good. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us. Our plan is to kind of start off at the base level because we weren't sure exactly the knowledge base of all the participants. If this is the first time doing anything with food costing, I'll go through some basics, and then Chef Rebecca will go into something a little bit more detailed, some spreadsheets that you can start plugging in your information to. So for myself, I've been in food service for about 50 years. I started out in country clubs down in the Metro New York area, worked my way up through everything from dishwasher to waiter to bartender. I have my business degree. I've worked in independent restaurants, chain restaurants, national management companies operating college campuses around the country, the school lunch program. I've done consulting, and now for the last 4 years, I'm here at REOC, the Rochester Educational Opportunity Center, overseeing with my partner chef here a 20-week culinary basics program in restaurant management. I'll let Rebecca tell you a little bit about herself, and then I'll get into the basics of the food cost.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Rebecca Griffin. I teach at Monroe Community College in the hospitality department, and I'm also the department chair here. I have also worked in multiple styles of restaurants, fine dining, chain restaurants, bakeries, and in corporate food service and higher education prior to my time coming to MCC. So I've been here about 4 years. Yeah, 4 years. And I'm really excited to talk with you all today. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Well, great. I'm going to start off with, some of the basics here that's really important to know. We go through this with our students also, how important it is to know things like how many ounces there are in a gallon, in a quart, in a pint, in a cup. So this table will give you a lot of the equivalents. And remember, you have to kind of decide on when you're starting your food costing, you need your invoices so you know your accurate pricing and also your yields in each of those cases. How many tortilla shells do I get out of a case? How many pounds of shredded mozzarella cheese there are in a case of cheese? So some industry standards, you're going to see, 4 with a slash and then a 5 and then a hashtag. So when you see the hashtag, it's really a pound sign. So knowing the different nomenclatures is really important. So, you can use these reference charts. It's great to have them. We have them hanging in the kitchen as a reference for our students. But part of our testing, they need to commit this to memory. So it's a really important, just an important document. And again, this one's called volume equivalence. Okay. One of the next slides I'd like to share with you is we also talk about conversions. All right, so if we're going to, if we have a recipe, a lot of us all look online for recipes, and it may be a recipe that is good for, a party of 4 for your family. But now if you're trying to extrapolate that out to some larger volumes, it's important to know your math skills. So that means all your multiplication tables, and you can notice there's a lot of fractions in cooking. So knowing how to either extrapolate it out to make it bigger or sometimes to make it smaller. So that's the math piece is really an important piece. So this is just a basic conversion chart. So we can take a look. 1 cup is 8 ounces, all right? And it goes right down along here. Remember, so this is fluid ounces. Different than weight. So, 1 pound is 16 ounces. So you hear that ounce, but you have to determine, is it a weight ounce or is it a fluid ounce? Just like the difference between a cup of water is different than a cup of flour. So using the right tools when you're measuring, especially in baking, is an important piece of it. So this is another good handy tool that we share with our students also. Okay. So one of the big things that we want to really make sure in order to do to find out your food cost, there's a thing called theoretical food cost and actual food cost. So your theoretical food cost is where you're costing each individual item. So we're going to go through an example here. So let's say a large cheese pizza. So it's great to have that cost of that. But now what happens when they drop a pizza, or one gets burned, or the cook that's making that pizza doesn't follow those standardized recipes, and you think that it's only costing you 8 ounces of mozzarella cheese, but that employee is actually putting 10 or 12 ounces of mozzarella cheese on it. So when you're thinking that you're making a certain dollar amount under theory, in reality, you're not. So you have that individual theoretical food cost, and then in order to do your food cost for your whole operation, you really need to take an inventory. Now, inventory, and Chef Rebecca can attest to this, it's not fun to do them, but it's an important way to really find out if you're making any money. So that's something for you to think about. It also helps you with production, knowing how much that you're going to need to order, how much you need to produce for a particular day. So knowing your inventory is an important piece. Some people are very good about doing it in their heads. In the corporate world that Rebecca and I come from, we were doing weekly inventories, and it could have, in some of the large operations, $40,000 or $50,000 worth of product. And again, your food cost is always a percentage of what your revenue is. So you have your food cost and then your revenue. So that comes out to a percentage. On a national average, it could be anywhere from 30 to 35%. Of course, some of the fast food restaurants have a lower food cost percentage, and then some of the higher end dinings, of course, have a higher food cost percentage. So you remember, you take dollars to the bank, not percentages. So for example, let's say you have that $8 burger, and I'll just throw it out there. Let's say you make $2 on that $8 burger. So, so you're making a 25% profit on that. So that'd be $2. But let's say you're in a steakhouse and you're selling a $20 steak and your food cost is $10. All of a sudden, now you made $10 in gross profit on that. Which do you want to sell, burgers or steaks? Well, it sounds great, but it depends on what your operation is in your restaurant mix is, what your menu mix is. So it's always an important piece to take a look at what your operation really is, and to do each item on your menu. And some are going to be a little higher, some are going to be a little lower. So that's really depends on how you like to price things. But that would be a whole nother course that we could take about menu design and menu pricing. All right. I'm going to share another couple of quick screens with you that may help you with this. So here's a quick weights and measures chart. So one of the things, so if you can look at here, so 1 cup is 8 ounces. This is a liquid measure, and all the way up. So a pint is 16 ounces, a quart is 32 ounces. And sometimes a lot of students learn visually. So if you start counting there's 16 cups in the 1 gallon. All right, so it's an important piece to know some of these basics that we have here. All right, and here's another little chart that helps here. So many of you are going to hear some nomenclature about a number 10 can here. And those are the big cans that you usually see in food service. And then if you can look at this off to the right, it has 12 3/4 cups. So for those of you who are looking for yields, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, when you're trying to figure out, well, how much am I going to get out of this can of black beans? How many portions can I get out of that if I'm trying to figure that out? So this is a good chart that helps you with that. And of course, everybody knows about those so-called ice cream scoops that you call them, or dishers in the world that we live in, and they all have a number next to them. So if you look, it goes from 40 all the way down to 6. Now, this is an interesting thing because just like the thickness of a wire in electricity, the bigger the number, the smaller the wire. In this case, the bigger the number, the smaller the scoop. So a number 40 scoop is only 1 tablespoon versus a number 6, it's a 10 tablespoon. So this is an important piece. I bring this out because when you're doing standardized recipes and you know that, okay, for every, you're planning on a number 6 scoop of macaroni and cheese to go out on the plate for, as a side, and someone is using a heaping scoop, all of a sudden you're not going to get the same yield with things. So standardizing your recipes is such an important thing. We all know that there's items that we make from memory. Well, that sounds fine and dandy when you're at home, but when you're in a commercial application and you're trying to make sure that the item that someone had today is the same taste and same amount as someone had it comes in next week to have it. So this way you don't cause any disappointment in the customer. So as an owner, manager, it's always an important piece to make sure that you double check your staff and your employees that they're following your standardized recipes. Okay. And so we're going to start quickly on a, okay. So when you're doing food costing, there's basically 3 types of equations that you really need to think about. So we are figuring out, is it by weight? So let's say it's a 30-pound box of shredded mozzarella cheese, and it's 6 5-pound bags of mozzarella cheese. And we know that we need to have 8 ounces of cheese on a particular pizza. So that's one formula that you would figure out. Next one could be volume. This is a liquid volume. So it might be that we need 3 ounces of lemon juice for this Greek lemon chicken soup. And you're trying to cost that out. And the last one is a count. This is a pretty straightforward one. A package of oyster crackers comes 140 in a case and it costs $12.36. So it's easy enough to divide the cost of the case by the number of items that there are in the case to get a cost per unit. Okay. So we're going to touch base quickly on one example. I'm going to give you a quick word problem with the formulas so you can use these as examples in your operation. So we always want to know, is it a cost per pound or a cost per ounce? Cost per liquid ounce, cup, pint, or gallon, and then the cost per each item. Okay, so those are the 3 equations that you really want to start thinking about when you're going to do a food cost. Okay. Any questions so far on things? Okay. Let's see, the next one is, sorry here. Okay. Here's the last one. So we're talking about a cheese pizza. So a round 16-inch, otherwise known as a large cheese pizza. Now, again, this is straight food cost. So right off of our invoices, it's a 16 round pre-cooked pizza shell. We buy from a company called Pomelia's. They're out of Utica, New York. And so they're packed 2 6 counts per case. So there's a total of 12 in a case. That cost for that case is $19.38. If you divide that by 12, each pizza shell is $1.62. Now you can make your own pizza shells, of course. You want to be consistent with it. I mean, as they say, there's a lot of money. That's why there's so many pizza shops, because you can make a lot of money with pizzas. So our pizza sauce, we do buy a canned pizza sauce, and then we do add some spices to it. But this is an industry brand pizza sauce. And this here, you see 6 number 10 cans. Those are the 6 big cans. And that big case usually weighs between 38 and 40 pounds. So there's $29.94 a case. So that boils down, if you divide that by 6, $4.99 a case, a can. And it also says right on the can how much the liquid weight is. It's 6 pounds, 8 ounces. And I know, so I did the math here. So each pound is 16 ounces. So 6 times 16 is 96. And then we're adding the 8 ounces here to get 104 ounces per can. So now we take the cost per the case divided by 104 ounces. All of a sudden, now that I know it's 29 cents per ounce. Okay. Next is our mozzarella cheese. And it's packed 4 or 5 pounds. This is an industry standard for cases of cheese. This is a shredded mozzarella, whole milk mozzarella. So there's 5 pound bags. Each case is $63. Now I divided it by 4 to get how much each bag was, and then divided each 5 pound bag by the 80 ounces. You got to, I should say 5 pounds for each pound. So 5 into 15, 82 comes to $3.16 per pound. And I divided that by 16 to get my cost per ounce. All right, so you keep going all the way down. So our recipe calls for 1 pizza shell. We just did the math up here for $1.62. Now this recipe calls for 8 ounces of pizza sauce. We know that it's 29 cents an ounce multiplied by the 8. Now we have $2.32 in the pizza sauce. And now here, a cup of cheese. Now, true, a cup of cheese, you know, is different than a liquid cup of water. So you need to measure if the recipe calls for 2 cups of cheese. I took a scale and actually weighed each of the cups. So each cup does weigh 4 ounces. So we had a total of 8 ounces of mozzarella cheese. And we already said it's 20 cents an ounce. Now we have $1.60 in that cheese cost. So we add up the $1.62 for the pizza shell, the $2.32 for the sauce, $1.60 for the cheese, for a total cost of $5.54 for just the pizza. So now let's say, I mean, you know, at let's say Wegmans, they do a cheese pizza now for $11. So all of a sudden, if you look at, if they're using the same products that we were, at $11, they'd be making $5.46 in gross profit. But now think about it. What does a pizza have to go in? You got to think about the pizza box. You also have to think about the labor to make it. Okay? So that's an important piece when we start talking about all the other things that are equivalent, you know, that are in there. So what is your labor cost? So you know what you want to get paid an hour. You have to think about how long it takes you to make that pizza, or how long it takes one of your staff members to make that pizza, and assign a labor cost to it. Also, now you also have some other expenses. If you have a brick and mortar restaurant, you have your rent that you have to think about, your overhead. You know, or here at the commissary, we know the rent is pretty low, but you still need to account for a certain amount for that. Not to mention, you also had certain other costs. So you know you have insurance that you also had to get to be a member of the commissary. So you need to come up with a figure on what that overhead costs. So it's food cost, paper cost. In a regular operation, you'd also think about chemical costs. What does it cost to clean things? One of the advantages of being a member of the commissary is that you don't pay for those cleaning. You have to do the cleaning, but you don't have to pay for the chemicals. The chemicals can be quite expensive sometimes. So this kind of gives you a little basics on where you need to go. And I'm going to share one last piece with you. Okay, let me just pull it up here. I apologize. Okay. All right, give me just a second, and we're going to share this guy. Okay, here we go. So here's what we do a lot of math problems for our students. So Arthur, and no relation to Arthur, our man of the hour down at the commissary, is making Caesar dressing. So we followed the recipe. And we're just going to start off slow. We want to know how much the grated Parmesan cheese costs for this Caesar dressing. We know that the case of it comes 2 5-pound bags, and it costs $37.36. We want to know how much 8 ounces is. So we start off with our cost. So you see your cost per case divided by the 10 pounds in the case. And now we come up with a cost per pound. Now we divide that by 16 because we know that there's 16 ounces in a pound to get our cost per ounce. And then the question asks, how much is 8 ounces? We multiply it by 8. And so just our grated Parmesan cheese for this recipe costs $1.87. So as Chef Rebecca is going to get into more of the full recipes, these are the individual items that are part of that recipe. But it's really an important lesson or strategy to make sure that you know what each one is. So the first one here, it was about weight, okay? So the ounces in weight. Here's one that Hank pours 20 ounces of lemon juice. This one's about liquid. And we're going to share this with you so you can see how these formulas all break down, okay? Because this one was asking, when he cleans it, he uses 20 ounces of lemon juice. So 20 ounces of lemon juice is a lot of lemon juice. It is one of the chef tricks to use it, but you don't need that much. So they were really wasting it, but we wanted to also show them, doesn't sound like much, but it does add up. Here, the next one here, this one is an each. So we know that sweet gherkin pickles come in the big pickle jars, the big ones. And right on the side of the jar, it says there's 171 in the count. Well, it's easy enough to divide 171 into 1343. So we have 8 cents per gherkin. And maybe you put 2 of them on each plate. And the last one here is about meatballs. So yeah, it does say 5 pounds. But now we have to kind of figure this out. So it's 5 pounds, but also each meatball weighs a half an ounce. So once we get down to the ounce price, we then have to multiply it by 1.5 because it asks how much are 3 meatballs, okay? So again, these are just some basic ones and we have more that we can share with you. But this gives you a good overview of where your foundation is about knowing what the pound sign is, the teaspoon, tablespoon, how many ounces there are in cups, pints, quarts, gallons, how many pounds there are how many ounces there are in a pound. These are important things that we need to know. All right. I see a question here. It says, "Is there a way, or should I include labor for production versus service?" Well, that's an individual question. So your baker, you have to think about what their productivity is. Are they here 20 hours a week? And then you can kind of break down how much their cost per labor hour is. And then you have to determine how long that they're taking to make it. So they may be making the batter, putting it into the pan, and it's cooking. But while it's cooking, they're actually working on something else. So you really need to kind of analyze how long that they really are working on that particular item and what their yield is. Are they making 5 loaves of bread or are they making 10 loaves of bread? So the more they make, of course, there's a law of diminishing returns, as they call it. Okay, so that's my portion of it. I'm going to turn it over to Chef Rebecca, unless anybody else has some other questions.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Chef Jim. That was fantastic. So let me just put this on slideshow. There we go. Okay, so I am going to be reiterating some of the details that Chef Jim talked about, but also going into some further detail in regards to the yield of some of those ingredients that go into your recipe costing. So I'm going to touch a little bit on unit costs to start with, product yield. We'll go over costing a recipe, also some key components for selling price and packaging as well. So Chef Jim definitely touched on your purchasing price. So AP, if you ever see the term AP, that typically stands for your as purchased price for a specific amount of ingredients, food. And it could be by the case, it could be by the each, it could be by the pound. And I just have a really simple example here that sometimes actually does get some students kind of backed up a little. So when you see that slash, it says 32/1 pound, if you can see that right under example. So a case of butter for us is 32 1 pound packages, which costs us $73.56. Ideally, we like to break it down to the pound, that's the unit. for 230, but going even further would be by the ounce. And we know there's 16 ounces per pound, so it's 14 cents an ounce. We'll talk a little about product yield and the edible portion. So EP is the edible portion of an ingredient. And what we mean by that is when we buy produce, we don't necessarily use all of that produce, although there's sometimes when we can use the trim, we oftentimes lose some of that, and that's called the yield percent is a percent of the produce we're able to use. And then we'll look at as service portion. So I just have an example here in regards to yield percent. So over here on the left-hand side where it says raw yield test. So say you're serving a salmon entree and you want to serve broccoli florets with it as the side. You buy in whole broccoli heads, you trim them, and you lose those stems. Maybe you have nothing else to use those for. I mean, you could probably put them in maybe a cream of broccoli soup, but maybe you have no need for that. So you'll start off with 20 pounds of broccoli heads, but you lose about 4 pounds of that from the trim loss, so losing the stems, which leaves you with 16 pounds, which is a yield of 80%. And we'll go through calculating that in the next few slides. There's also a loss for shrinkage. So think of the meats that you're cooking. We lose a good percent from cooking your raw product. This is an example of if you shrink about 0.8 pounds out of your purchase of 7 pounds, you have 11% shrinkage there. So what I did is I took an example right from our kitchen just to show you what I mean by the yield and the trim. So we have 3 carrots here on the left. We purchased those at 14.25 ounces. After I trimmed off the ends and peeled them, this is what I was left with. I then just cut them up like I was going to saute them for a dish and weighed, and it came out to 11.4 ounces. So we lost about 20% of our carrots from beginning to end. So that now makes my cost more expensive than the as purchased cost. And I also have an example here from cooking a pork tenderloin. So we have 15.8 ounces starting. I'm guessing this started at 16 ounces, so 1 pound before we trimmed off a little bit of it and seasoned it. Here's an example after we pan seared it and let it rest for a little bit on a sheet pan. And then my after weight is 12.8 ounces. So again, we lost about 20% there of shrinkage. So I like to show this because if you're thinking about putting a cheeseburger on your menu and you're promoting it as half-pound cheeseburger, quarter-pound cheeseburgers, if you start off with an 8-ounce weight, half pound of raw beef, and then you cook that cheeseburger, it's actually going to be about 6 ounces that you're giving to the customer. So you want to make sure there's truth in your marketing as well. Is it half-pound burger before you cook it or after you cook it? Of course, you don't need to advertise that to your customer, but being aware of that and advertising properly is important to remember. And also, along with this, if you're purchasing a pound of pork and you think you're going to get 4 4-ounce portions out of that, in reality, you're going to get a lesser amount and may not be able to get that 4th portion when you're portioning that up. So calculating that in as well. So the next, I know I'm going really fast, so feel free to stop me if you have questions. I am not reading the chat as I go along. So if anyone wants to just let me know what's being posted, that would be great. But so next we'll look at our recipe costing card and calculating out your individual recipes. So first you want to start with your standardized recipe. As Chef Jim mentioned, standardized recipes are extremely important in your operation for more than one reason. You want to make sure you have a set recipe that your line cooks will follow every time, so your customer is getting a consistent product. But also you want to make sure that you're using the proper amount of ingredients in your recipes for cost. You're most likely going to purchase a set amount with an anticipation of putting that into your meals. And if a line cook is using 4 ounces of butter instead of 2 ounces of butter, that's drastically increasing your costs. And you may also run out. You can get your as purchase prices from your invoices. So it's really important to hold on to those invoices and those receipts. They're great references for the future. So what I do personally, we have a restaurant here on campus. We scan everything or take a picture of it and load it into our computer and file it by the month and date. just so we can go back and reference this if we ever need to calculate out any costs again, or if our prices are drastically changing. We're going to also calculate out the unit price, edible price, and find individual ingredient costs. So for this first slide here, I'm just gonna move, there we go. Column D up here at the top. This is our recipe unit adjustment. So what I did to start out, oh, I can write on this, okay. So I just went ahead and loaded in one of our garden salads that we serve here at the restaurant. I put the amount of all the ingredients, I went down and put all the titles, I put my as purchased cost and the as purchased units. And now we need to find out what the cost is for each individual unit. So our recipe is written in ounces, we're purchasing in pounds. We want the cost per ounces so we can properly calculate out this recipe. So what we're gonna do is take this 22.36 and divide it by 36 pounds, just to have that pound price, it's good to know. And then go even further and take that 62 cents and divide it by 16 ounces per pound. So we would put those 4 cents right in here. So it's really important that your unit that you are referencing matches your recipe. So you're not always going to purchase in the same unit that your recipe is written in. So next we need to also know the yield. So some items are going to be 100%, like that pizza we just went through. The yield is 100%. You get to use all that sauce, all that cheese, unless you drop some on the floor, lose a pizza, that type of thing, burn a pizza, you'll have some loss there. But for this case scenario, I chose a recipe where all of our product isn't usable. We're gonna have some loss with the red onion, the peel, the cucumbers, maybe we take the seeds out. So for romaine lettuce here, we have about a 75% yield. And I have a link here to a resource that I like to reference. Let's see if I can open it up. I'm not sure if it's gonna let me. This is just gonna, so you don't have to do out the guesswork like I showed you. There we go. Okay, there you go. So you should see this chef's resources. There's books that we purchase for in college, but there's also websites you can go to where people have already figured out what the yield is for all of these fruits and vegetables. So you don't have to go through like I did and weigh out the before and after the carrots. So this is going to give you an idea of what your yield is for those menu items. So I did share that just so you can have that reference as well. There we go. So to calculate what your edible cost is going to be, so it's important to know that your edible cost is always higher than your as purchase cost because you're losing some product. Rather than having a full pound of that pork, like I mentioned, you actually only had about 12 ounces. So for the romaine lettuce, we are going from 4 cents an ounce, and then we're going to divide it by 75%. And I always like to remind everyone, because a lot of my students forget this, you need to convert percents into a decimal. So you just move that decimal over 2 spots to get the proper calculation there. So romaine lettuce actually costs us 5 cents an ounce because we're losing about 75% of that lettuce. And then the next step for this piece is just calculating the total ingredient cost. Now we know the ounce cost, we have the proper unit cost. But now we need to take this 5 cents and multiply it by the amount used in our recipe, which is 2.5. So that gives us 13 cents here. So we would then go through and calculate all of these down the line to get our total ingredient cost, which is 56 cents. There is one other factor that we like to calculate in to help with the total recipe cost. And this is called the Q factor, the questionable ingredient factor. These are for items that are difficult to measure. So salt and pepper to taste. Maybe you just do a pinch or two of salt and pepper. It's really not something you can calculate it out. It's such a small amount that it's less than a penny. Maybe it's a dash of hot sauce. Maybe you could even calculate or account for some waste with this. A lot of organizations will use a percent, so usually about 1 to 2%. So for this example, we're using 1.5% for our questionable ingredient factors here. I've seen some restaurants use just a flat dollar amount. So for every dinner they serve, they add $1 on for the questionable factor. But for this case scenario, we do a percent, whatever would make sense for your business. So it's our 56 cents is our subtotal times 0.015 because we're again turning that percent into a decimal. So it's only a penny. And again, this is just a small garden salad. Some recipes, if you're making a gallon or two of tomato sauce, maybe a couple dollars added on. So our total recipe cost then would be 57 cents here. And it's also important to know how many portions you are getting out of each recipe. So I have a project in class that I have students do, and I had one student submit buffalo chicken empanadas, awesome recipe. But in the recipe clearly made maybe 16 portions, but they were under the impression, okay, this is gonna make one. So you need to understand the volume and how much your recipe is producing to really get the full cost. So again, for this example, total cost is 57 cents. So then we look at maybe the food cost percentage. We use this to identify what is our selling price going to be. Standard is about 30–35%. A lot of restaurants try and aim for that. But again, like Jim mentioned, that food cost percent for a burger may be different than a steak because you can't increase the cost that substantially to make it a 30%. So you may be making more money, physical money on one, or you may be making a better food cost on one. So for this example here, we aim for a 30% food cost. Our mathematical price will be $1.90. That price may not make sense as your selling price. Maybe you like to sell to the nines. Maybe you have a standard menu where that's your pricing structure. Maybe you like to sell to the 25s or the zeros. So it may or may not make sense. But you also want to take into account your packaging that goes along with this. So if this is just a standard recipe in your restaurant, you're serving it on a plate, there's no additional packaging, that's great. But if you're selling like a grab and go salad, and I'll show you on this next slide here, your additional costs here will be the package itself, which is usually about 25 to 50 cents, depending on the size of the container. You probably have a label on there, and you have the additional cost for the dressing as well that goes on there. And I'll get to that in a minute as well. And you also want to include in your pricing a reference to competitors. Now, your customers don't need to know that you're looking at your competitors, but you want to determine what are your competitors selling and what are they selling it for. So one thing that I did when I was in the industry, and I even do now with our restaurant, we go out and we purchase from our competitors. We look on their website, we take notes. What's their menu items? What are they offering? What are their portion sizes? So I have an example here. This is a grab and go salad, chicken Caesar salad we make here at MCC in our student run restaurant. Now my husband just happens to work at St. John Fisher College and runs their grab and go program. So he sent me a picture of their Caesar salad and I compared it. And we actually have the same exact packaging because I liked their packaging and I said, this works great, let's bring it to MCC. But I was looking over the two differences. Same amount of lettuce, I think probably the same amount of tomatoes and chicken, but theirs just looks fresh. So take into account how your ingredients are presented on those items as well. And then you can compare pricing. Now we have actually about the same price, sales price, I believe, but when we were doing our analysis for grab and go as well, we went to Wegmans, we went to other colleges, RIT, Sodexo, just to see what's our pricing. And we took everything apart, we tasted it, because we want to fall in line with our competitors. We don't want a customer to say, oh, well, I can get this down the road for 50 cents less. Also, when you're thinking about your pricing, you want to think about the perceived value as well. Just because you have a 30% food cost doesn't mean that should necessarily be the price you charge. Personally, when I go to a restaurant, if I see like a steak that's priced at $14 to $19, I'm not going to buy it because my perceived value is the quality is going to be low. But if I see a steak that's priced for $32, my perceived value is that's going to be the best steak I've ever had. And I really hope they meet my expectations. So one piece that goes into pricing is not only the cost of the food, not only the cost of the packaging, which I'll show over here as well, but the cost of your your competitors, that you fall in line with your competitors. Another piece to think about when we're thinking about the packaging of those items. So this, I just took this garden salad or that Caesar salad. Our containers cost us about 32 cents. Labels are very expensive, 11 cents. Those little 2-ounce portion cups and lids that you put the dressing in, maybe your standard's to give 1, but maybe customers want 2 or 3. And if you're not charging for those additional salad dressings that are added on, that's additional cost, that food cost that you're losing. The fork, the knife, the napkin, the to-go bag. And I am constantly telling my students, not everyone needs a to-go bag. If they have one little item, is it worth the extra 27 cents? Because it does add up. So this extra cost for that $1.90 salad, there's an additional 84 cents that goes along with that. So you want to take that into account when you're putting that selling price together. Now, again, if you're serving it in a restaurant and you have china that's just going to be washed, then you save the 84 cents. Some other things to think about also when you're packaging those items, the shape of your package, the size. Those salad containers, for example, come in flat lid and dome lid. If you have the wrong lid, it's actually going to make a huge difference in the appearance and how stable that menu item is when the customer's walking away. So the dome lid is nice because someone can put the dressing on there and shake it all up, but then the flat lid holds everything nice and tight, so the appearance stays in place for a longer period of time because it's all pushed together. Recyclable and compostable packaging is really big right now, but it's important to know the uses and to educate your staff and your customers on recycling. So certain numbers can be recycled and put into a recycling bin. And I know it's recently changed here in Monroe County. My husband's really into sustainability, and we used to be able to recycle like 1 through 5, and now it's 1 and 2s. So if you're buying a number 5 packaged item, it may not be able to be recycled, so your efforts may be wasted. That goes along with composting. So it's fantastic if you're using compostable packaging and materials, but really to get the full effects, it actually needs to be composted with the compost food waste that not all establishments have. Some other pieces with that that actually we've run into is some of that compostable material is real flimsy. So if you have like a saucy dish, as soon as your customer gets it, if they don't eat it within the first 15, 20 minutes, chances are the material is going to break down and a hole will be created. So you want to test out your packaging before sending it home with your consumers as well. Resources. You can get all sorts of free samples prior to purchasing and deciding on what packages you want. Greenware is a big one, very popular. I can attest by them, but most paper companies now have some sort of recyclable or compostable alternative to this point, because it's very, very popular in the industry. And some customers are going to buy from one location over another based on your efforts towards sustainability as well. You could purchase packaging from your broadline distributors, or you could even go to a specific paper company, just depending on the level and quantity that you will be purchasing. Some other pieces I want to bring up as well. So we just looked over like the basics of costing out your recipe, individualizing each recipe. I know this looks, and I'm just going to go back to this recipe card. This looks really daunting, especially when you probably have 20 recipes on your menu or more. But I'm going to tell you it's worth it. And you could even create this in an Excel file fairly easily where that stuff is saved. And if a price changes, you can easily go correct that. It's really important to know your food cost so you can properly price and make the money and have a sustainable business. And you'll have it forever. Once you do it once, it may take you 20 hours to do it. You're always going to have that though. So it's important to know your pricing, know your yield of your ingredients, and also be aware of the cost when you're purchasing those items and having a good relationship with that vendor. One other piece I want to add in is once your business has been running for a period of time, you want to analyze your menu and analyze your sales. So pulling sales reports to see which items are popular and which items aren't popular, because that's going to have a long run effect on your overall food costs for your operation. You may have, and menu analysis is, like Jim said, is a whole nother presentation, but it's important to look at weekly, monthly, just to see, are there any dogs that we really need to get off of that are actually costing us more money to keep on here? What else do I want to add on there? I think Jim also mentioned about the menu mix, which is really important as well. Your entire menu, each menu item isn't going to be that 30 to 35% food cost. You're going to have variable, but ideally you want to have your overall menu average to be about 30%. Typically, we see about labor rates 34%, but again, that's going to vary depending on your productivity. And then another piece you can look at when you're thinking about the cost of your operation is meeting with your vendors. So I think when you're starting out, probably you're going to go to Restaurant Depot and purchase on your own. You're going to maybe buy from Wegmans or the smaller stores. But once your business has really taken off, meet with your vendors. They can pull reports to see what you're purchasing the most of, what you're paying for it, and how you can save money. Chicken breasts, for example. Maybe you have something featured on your menu and the 4-ounce chicken breast is perfect, but maybe you're selling, that's your biggest seller. It might be more sustainable to buy what's called a random, where you get random sized chicken breasts in a case and you portion out as needed. That'll save you a lot of money. So meeting with your vendors and having that good relationship is also huge in maintaining low food costs and pricing. And then 2 more things I just want to bring up before we get on to questions. But we all know right now food costs have been skyrocketing over the past 2 to 3 months. I was actually just talking to, we have a technical assistant here who also owns a brewery locally, and they serve these Bavarian pretzels that are just huge, very popular. Went from $30 a case to $47 a case. How do you manage that? So how do you manage those increased food costs? Especially when you have a specific price and a clientele that wants to pay that specific price and niche. I mean, let's hope it goes down, but little things you could do, maybe changing some of the menu items on your menu. So maybe you don't want to remove your most popular menu item, but you could add additional menu items that are going to help offset that food cost. So you can alter your products, but increase perceived value for those products. So making some chicken thighs, for example, might be more cost effective than one of your chicken dishes. If you make a killer dish, that would be a great offset. Or even if you have like a brisket on your menu, maybe take that same concept, that same menu concept, but put it into pizza form, grilled pizza. So you still have that same taste and flavor profile, but it's in a less expensive dish. Product disclaimers on your menus as well. Say, due to rising costs, we had to increase all of our menu items by 1 to 3%. And maybe you won't make up all of the missed food costs, but at least you're educating your customers as to, this is why we're increasing.
Wait, no, because you're on the Zoom call. I'm on silent right now. So, right?
I think that's it right now. Are there any questions?
No, don't. You were on the Zoom call. So wait, why?
Any questions?
Zoom life, we're all used to it. Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. I have a couple questions, but I'm going to hold them if somebody else has any questions that they'd like to start with. Feel free to take yourself off of mute and ask questions directly to either Rebecca or Jim. And if not, you can also put your questions in the chat. Ruth, it looks like you have a question.
So products that you don't, that might be like a creative thing, like I mentioned, I have a bakery. If I haven't done a particular cake before, or if you're developing a recipe that you don't know how long it's going to take, or is a unique item, how do you cost that out? I mean, you have your basic ingredients, which are minimal, but how do you kind of cost out creativity?
That's a great question. So is this like research and development before you finalize that item? Oh, I think we lost her.
What was that? I'm sorry.
So is this more of the research and development phase before you start selling that menu item?
It's more like I'll get lots. Sorry, I'm on the wrong screen now. Lots of requests, and people will send me a Pinterest cake, and I tell them right away it's Pinterest, and I can't do it exactly like that. But here's the concept. But I haven't done that particular cake before, so not knowing how long that particular cake's going to take.
That's a great question. So my initial
So
thought,
it's kind of more individual orders than.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, well, looking at your competitor pricing, but two, also having a baseline for your cake. So maybe having a standard line as, okay, this size cake costs this much, here are the ingredients for that. But also you could say, my time, these cakes cost per hour. I'm not sure how many businesses do that, but I have seen it before. Okay, this cake is going to cost me 5 to 6 hours to make. I'll tie that into the billing price and having a good estimate for that. Jim, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, and it is a challenge, especially, I know we have one member who's doing some unbelievable, unique looking cakes, and she shared with us during the interview process that she may have worked on it for 2 or 3, a couple hours this day, a couple hours the next day. My advice is to take copious notes and always have a standard base. So if it's, what a sheet cake is going to cost you, or a 3-layer cake with a particular type of icing, the things that you make all the time, start with that. And then, of course, increase your costs once, after you start doing a few of them, you're going to say, okay, and hey, this one is really involved. It's going to take me 3 hours to do this one. So, don't cut yourself short. Put an estimate in there, make sure that you're getting paid for your time. The ingredients themselves, you're working off of a recipe to begin with. And once you do that enough, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how much, 3 cups of flour cost, how much, 2 cups of sugar cost. And to have a little cheat sheet next to you. Once you do it once, as Rebecca had mentioned, you don't have to do it again. So all those staple products, I guess. All right, I know that, my butter costs, $3.50 a pound. It's an unsalted butter. It's a good quality butter. And so now you have some of those staple costs right there, and you can quickly start figuring out a little bit for your estimate of things.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Great question.
I think also I'd like to just ask a follow-up question kind of related to that is, and this came up, Jim, in that interview too, is also figuring out what your, and Rebecca, you hit on this too with the steak. Right, that the perceived value and all of that too is that for that woman, for instance, who does custom cakes, not everybody is going to be willing to pay for a custom cake, and that's okay, right? Some people love sheet cake from Wegmans, and that's fine too. And things are priced accordingly, and that I'm wondering, because it seems like it could be a bit of a chicken or the egg to decide on the cost of your product or the price of your product first, depending on where you want to fall in the market. So can you kind of weigh in on that idea? A very loose question of mine.
Well, I think some of it may tie into looking at competitors. There are a lot of ways to take a look online for different things and to get a ballpark figure of what people are willing to pay for certain things. And some of it, especially these unique things, we all know that with a unique artisan cake, you are going to pay more for it. If someone is price shopping, that may not be the person that you want to do business with. If they're comparing it to, oh, I can get that cake at Walmart. Well, yes, you can, but you're not going to get the same, unique designs and things like that. So, many of you are in your infancy stages of your business. Some of it will be trial and error, but always make sure you keep your copious notes. So you've got your recipe and you know that, okay, I spent 2 hours, getting this together here. So it's important. We all can't remember everything that kind of comes up. So taking those notes, and you are going to make a little bit less on one of them, and you're going to make a little bit more as you get better at some of the techniques also. Practice is an important piece of food service. Just because I can show you how to properly dice an onion doesn't mean you can do it as efficiently as someone who has been practicing and doing it for quite some time. So there is some trial and error on that R&D, so to speak. It is I don't think there's one specific answer to that one question there. So, but keep your notes and don't sell yourself short in terms of of what your value is and what people are willing to pay. Okay.
I have a question from the chat that I actually had myself too. So we talked about food costs. Rule of thumb is generally 30%. Labor rule of thumb is 34%, I think you said. What about packaging? Or is packaging meant to be part of the food cost incorporated into that?
Go right ahead, Rebecca.
So yeah, packaging is definitely a separate line item, considered directs or paper goods. And you certainly want to take that into account. It is calculated out separately from food costs, but it is still considered a part of that material cost or that menu item cost. So one challenge we often run into, especially with restaurants who do dine in and to go, is you can't really charge a separate price for the same item and having that additional packaging. So calculating it in is important to take into account. That's a great question. I don't think I'm answering that very well, but maybe adding on that extra $1 for paper cost to your sales price. So you're ensuring that you're covering your costs there. I think would be ideal.
Because if you're cooking in-house, you still have a cost for the chemicals. You still have, a plate that breaks. You still have silverware that gets thrown out. So, make sure that you incorporate some of that replacement cost in when you're starting to figure it. As I mentioned earlier, that theoretical versus actual, in your operation, in order to get a true understanding if you are going to make money, you need to do a profit and loss statement, a P&L. So you have your revenues that kind of come down, is my cash revenues, my credit card revenues. All, could be rebates that you maybe get back from a distributor by purchasing certain things. And then you have your costs. You have your raw food cost. You have your paper cost, your chemical cost, your labor cost, your rent, your gas and electric. So all of those go into a spreadsheet, a P&L, because that's really for, you may think you're making a lot of money on this one item, but once you put all the other things together, that's why they call it in the black or in the red, So it's an important piece. And I know that one of our board members, Ebony, there certainly can help them as part of a good business plan. You need to have a pro forma P&L. What am I anticipating in terms of my sales? What am I anticipating in what my costs are? And, it's important to start putting some numbers in there and to see if it starts making sense. That you have one staff member and they make $15 an hour and they plan on working them, 20 hours a week. So do that multiplication out there. What your insurances are in there. So if you have an accountant, or if even with QuickBooks, it's really good. They have a lot of software that are out there to start putting those numbers down in there because they add up quickly, some of your costs.
Any insight specifically? So that response sounded more like we were talking about, the grab and go clamshell sort of setup. Any insight into packaged food goods? Because I know that we have a couple people here that are in packaged foods. So any insight into that in terms of the costs related to packaging around that? And if anybody is specifically packaging related, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a more direct question.
So I have seen businesses go with about a 10% paper cost when they're looking at their selling price and their package cost. So that's their goal. Depending on what type and style of packaging, that may vary up or down. I was talking to someone actually right before this, and we were talking about jars of sauce because I know sauce is a big one. And you could have 2 jars of sauce right next to each other, and one has just a label that stands out a little more, and maybe the bottle design is just a little different. It costs a little more, it's higher end, but chances are people are going to go for that higher end styled bottle. So their cost may be more expensive, but having just a broad line of this is the percent I want to go for, and it really matches your brand identity, I think is important too.
Yep, and it's, yes, you can go to those restaurant depots and take a look at some of the different things they have. I always like to have a connection with, a local vendor. So there's a lot of paper vendors out there. There's regional out there. There's Chuddy Paper. There's Rochester Paper. There's Maine's Paper and Food. And establish a relationship with one of the salespeople, and they're going to bring you samples in. So most of the, whether it be Pactiv or Mobile Chemical or Genpack, I mean, there's so many different brands out there, and they all have sample packs. So talk to your salesperson to find out and say, listen, I'm looking for, a particular size bag. All right, is it a paper bag? Does it have a handle on it? What the weight of the bag is. As Rebecca mentioned earlier, if you're putting a saucy thing into a compostable, smaller container, without any barrier for it to start soaking up that liquid, or maybe you want to think about a microwavable container. Now those cost a little bit more, but now it also adds a little perceived value to your meal because they don't have to take it out of that package, put it into their own container, especially if it's something to grab and go that someone is going to go back to their office and they can use the employee, lunchroom, and there's a microwave in there. So there are so many different things that are out there, but it really boils down to what your product is and what's going to fit best. And you may have to experiment with it. But again, establishing a relationship, and you can look online for different things. Webstaurant is another online smallwares, catering, all kinds of different stuff, and they have packaging also. But I always found it best, to sit down with one of my salespeople from, whose specialty is that, and then tell them what you're looking for and have them bring samples back to you, because they're going to give pricing to you. So you're going to really know your hard pricing, and you may make a decision to say, it looks great, but it's going to drive my cost up a lot more. Maybe I'll use this package instead, that it's only 22 cents instead of 42 cents, for as an example. So, that's what salespeople do. Yeah, they want to sell you it, but they're all, use them for information. They're a resource for you to use. Now, in pre-COVID days, or I say BC, before COVID, they used to have food shows. So like Palmer's used to have a food show, and they would have all different types of vendors there, and you could kind of go through and sample and take a look at things. I know Regional for many years used to do a paper and chemical show over at Frontier Field. So if you were an existing customer, not only did you get the benefit of being able to talk one-on-one with different packaging and chemical folks, because that's what they specialize in. They're not a food company, but then, they would reward you, so to speak, by, having you, it's a nice buffet that they would go through and watching a game. But they've kind of gone away from some of those, and so more of them are virtual now. So Cisco's gone away from them, but, they have a lot of things, especially if you establish an account, a lot of online ordering. You can click on those particular items and see what the specifications are, see what the costs are. You can search for different things. So, they're building a relationship with a vendor is invaluable, but, you also have to keep them honest and make sure you check your invoices. So in certain applications, you do what's called a bid. So you might be bidding all your items, and then you're comparing, all right, is it Palmer's, is it Cisco, is it US Foods, is it Curtsy? For certain operations, and then they may lock that price in for a certain period of time. Things like produce, of course, produce changes weekly. So establishing a relationship with a produce vendor, and then every Monday morning, you get a fax or an email with what the prices are for that week, because, produce changes weekly. When I was in the school lunch business, we used to do a collective bid with all the Monroe County schools, and we would put it all out there collectively. So yeah, so I might have sold 50 cases of spaghetti sauce. Rebecca sold 50 cases. Laura, you have a bigger district. You sold 100 cases, and you roll it up. And all of a sudden, we want a price on 1,000 cases of spaghetti sauce instead of, you know, Joe getting a street account, he's only going to go 3 cases. So, and they would lock in those prices for a certain amount of time. We found, so we're here at REOC, we're part of the SUNY system. So we do an OGS bid, Office of Governmental Services out of out of Albany. So we can piggyback onto theirs. So those prices are already, it's a cost plus a percentage is the way that one works. But I did find by checking my invoices, so for example, there was a chemical by Ecolab, it's called Assure, which is a silverware soap chemical. And it's usually around $24 a gallon. You know, it's a little over 90 bucks or $89, $88 for a case of it. And all of a sudden, one of my invoices, we got charged 138 cases, $138 for it. Well, for some reason, that pricing fell out of the, you know, the Cisco site. But if I didn't check my invoices, I wouldn't have known that. And all of a sudden, my costs went up. So it's an important piece to know what your invoices are.
And I just want to chime in about that too, that in working with distributors, that it doesn't have to be I mean, Jim's talking about it on this very large scale level. You can, especially if, let's say you're starting out at the commissary, you're starting out in your own restaurant, bakery, whatever, you can, you know, you can always start on a will call level, right? You don't have to jump in with both feet and only commit to one distributor. You can play the field a little bit. You can get things, you can, you know, have them kind of compete on prices amongst each other and kind of shop around. That's totally acceptable. People do it all the time. And it can be mix and match. You can get some stuff from not regional distributors, from Restaurant Depot, some stuff from Palmer, some stuff from Wegmans. You know, it's really up to you and worth noting there. One question I had too was, you know, the idea of the recipe card, I think, is a great one. A wonderful exercise, also totally daunting, right? As you said, it's something worth doing and you have it for as long as that menu item is, you know, in rotation for you. Any thoughts on, and this is something that Arthur and I really encourage at the commissary as people are starting out, is really focusing on streamlining their recipes and their offerings as well. So making sure that you're not trying to do everything. You have a couple of key items that you know that you do really well. So if you could talk about that, you know, any insight into that, and also the value and any strategy towards making sure that you're being really thoughtful in your ingredients to ensure that there's crossover and a lack of waste and shrink because of that.
That is a great topic, actually, that we often talk about in class when menu planning. Making sure you're cross-utilizing your ingredients. Don't spend all this time making a chipotle aioli for one recipe. You can use that on multiple dishes. It could be a drizzle on like a mac and cheese, or you put on a panini. So cross-utilizing your recipes is really, really important. Keeping your inventory low and your selection low, so you can use and have less product on hand, which is your money. You have less money tied up in inventory. Another piece there too is, like with those, the carrot example, those scraps can actually be saved for a vegetable stock, a chicken stock. You can reutilize those pieces. So using all of your food is important. I know sometimes I'll see myself do this, is try and use everything up, but then I ended up using more ingredients just by saving a few cents here and there, making things that aren't necessary. Jim, I'm sure you have things to add to that as well.
Sure. You know, I'm a firm believer in the 80-20 rule. So the 80-20 rule goes by this: 80% of your costs usually come from 20% of your products that you have on your shelf. So I always try to use this example. If there's something, you know, that you're going shopping between two distributors, if you go through one case a year and it costs $5 more, is that worth it versus the things that you go through 50 cases a year that you save $1 on? So you really have to kind of, so again, that 80-20 rule, you got to look at, you know, what am I spending most of my money on? 20% of your
Wow.
core products. And that cross-utilization is an important piece that Rebecca was talking about. So using those randoms, well, we're not talking about a chicken sandwich. We're talking about diced chicken that's going to go on a salad, or strips of chicken, and it's going to weigh out to 4 ounces. Then it doesn't matter what size the chicken breast is. But if you're looking at, you know, a consistent product all the way through, and you want to maybe go with that 4 or 5 ounce chicken breast. So you really kind of have to be very thoughtful and insightful when you're designing your menu and how many things. And remember, you know, your menus can always change. There's a lot of restaurants that do seasonal menus. One of the strategies, instead of having a hard printed menu, you can also buy menu plastic inserts, so you can change a sheet. We had to do that. Remember, I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago, tomato prices went out through the roof. And instead of $20 a case, they were like $45 a case, and they were coming from Europe. So if you remember some of the fast food restaurants where they would normally automatically put a tomato on it, they were asking, did you want tomato on that? It's 25 cents extra. That was, of course, a crazy time, but so that 80-20 rule, again, is an important piece to take a look at.
And another piece I do want to bring up is you can't be everything to everyone, so you can't try to appease everyone. So if you have a Jamaican themed menu, you know, keep it within that theme. I know, like, what's really popular right now is allergens, and really big. It's more common than it ever once was. So maybe you do have one dish on your menu that is allergen friendly and can help with, you know, a family going out to eat, and they have that one offering, but you don't necessarily need to put 4 or 5 allergen friendly menu items on there to give, you know, versatility. But yeah, you know, follow your theme, follow your concept.
Yep.
We have one question in the chat from Alvin, and I was hoping that Tom Seymour was going to be able to unmute himself to answer it, because he is our packaging expert on our board, but he might be on a call. And oh, great, Tom's here. So Tom, the question is, the question from Alvin, and Alvin, if you want to clarify, go ahead, but he's saying, what is better to use for sauce, glass bottles or plastic bottles? I know that sounds like a simple question, but it's not. So Tom, do you want to give like a quick and dirty response to that?
Yeah, conventionally, glass is going to be your best bet. There certainly are plastic containers available. I assume when you say sauce, you mean pasta sauce. So an acidic tomato-based sauce that's going to be thermally processed. And so glass is going to give you your best barrier. Tomatoes and some of the oils that you might use are fairly highly oxidative. So glass is going to give you that ultimate barrier. And that's what you're looking for from a shelf life perspective, to make sure that you're delivering the highest quality product to your customer, and that it's able to stay on the shelf for the period of time that you intend. I have seen in the time that I've been in the pasta sauce industry that, you know, there's silicone dioxide coated polyester jars now out on the market. And that gives a pretty darn good barrier, pretty close to glass. However, the market is a little bit iffy on it, because conventionally the consumer recognizes glass, and for whatever reason the consumer recognizes glass as a premium. And when you put it in plastic, and if you notice, you go to the grocery store, and a lot of those kind of store brands and private label or value brands are in plastic, because the consumer recognizes that as something that's not a premium. I wish we could change the consumer's mind, because there's absolutely nothing wrong with that plastic, and it's recyclable just like glass and all those great things. And then the last point is, I've seen sauces going into pouches lately. So, you know, I'm working on a couple of tomato-based products. You just have to be careful when you get into flexible pouches and sauces that you're selecting the proper materials to protect the product and give you that barrier to make sure that you can get the shelf life you're looking for.
Tom, am I right in thinking that, right, most sauces are going to have to go through what's called a scheduled process before you can bring them to market. And our website has information on that. You know, if you were in the process of hoping to join the commissary, we would direct you to work with Cornell to get that schedule process done. Essentially what it is, it's Cornell fact checking how you make your product to ensure you don't kill somebody if they eat it, right? And so I believe that they would also advise on packaging based on your product. Tom,
Yeah.
Is that within their purview?
Yeah, I mean, they will give you some direction. What I will tell you is that if you're working in tomato sauce, yes, it's likely gonna have to go through a process authority depending on the chemistry of the product. And it's important that you get that step done first, because that thermal process that the process authority gives you is gonna be critical in what you select for packaging. Because, for example, a glass jar can withstand quite a robust set of thermal stress, where a flexible pouch may not. And so understanding, does that product have to be filled at 180 degrees and held for 2 minutes? Or is it 195 and held for a minute? Or does it have to be heated to 195 and then run through a pasteurization tunnel? These things will all have an impact on the type of packaging that you end up selecting. So step one is always running it through. If it's a thermally processed product, make sure you have your process defined before you start putting the cart ahead of the horse.
Great. Okay. So we actually have 3 board members here who have lots of great expertise. Anybody, any further questions? You can unmute or put it in the chat, whatever your preference. While we're waiting for somebody to get up the energy to do that, I will say that this is going to be recorded. It is recorded. As Hannah said in the chat, it'll be up in a couple of days on our website, on our recorded workshops tab. I believe she's also going to send it out to everybody who RSVP'd for this workshop. You're also going to find all of the attachments there. Again, for people who are slow learners like me, super valuable. Maybe you want to have your invoices and receipts and a couple of your recipes in your mind, and you just re-watch this as you have all that stuff printed out or in a form that you would use. And that sounds like a really great use of time to save a lot of money and really get to know what your products are, because if you don't know them, who will? Okay, it sounds like no more questions. So I want to thank Rebecca and Jim for putting this together. This is a really, really valuable presentation. I think that the group really found it useful. You got lots of accolades in the chat, so thank you for that. And thank you everybody for attending. And if you have any follow-up questions about the commissary or whatever it might be, you know how to find us because you have found our website. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.